She believed he was resting. She believed he was alone. She believed he loved her. But when her driver called to ask, "Mom, this isn't a retreat. This is a penthouse in the city," she didn't cry. She drove herself. And what she saw behind that door changed her life without saying a single word. Welcome to Mr. Charles Stories, where every tale echoes the strength, scars and silence people carry when love doesn't go as planned. Have you ever found out the truth about someone, but they never said a word? Have you ever smiled through something that nearly broke you? This is a story about what happens when a woman walks into her husband's second life and chooses quiet power over chaos. Stay to the end, because what she did after the truth is where her real power lived. The waves were slow today, soft enough to hear her breath between their breaks. Nael Arden sat on the stone bench near the cafe she visited every morning. Same seat, same time. Locals knew her by her stillness. She was kind, respectful, reserved. She smiled politely but never invited conversation. She had a presence, the kind that came from surviving something she never explained. She'd been here for almost a year, quietly building her life again. And the only thing louder than the wind that day was the memory that brought her here. Nael didn't grow up with wealth. She was raised in upstate New York, surrounded by woods and worn-down cabins that smelled of pine and rain. Her mother worked nights at the local hospital. Her father ran a hardware store until his back gave out. They taught her how to fix what she could and let go of what she couldn't. They taught her how to listen more than speak. She carried those lessons into adulthood. She graduated from a small college, studied interior design, built a boutique client list that spread by word of mouth. She never advertised. She didn't need to. And when she met Kalen Drex, she wasn't impressed by his money. She was moved by his quiet. He didn't flex his wealth. He didn't dominate rooms. He noticed small things, like how she tied her hair in a loose knot when she was tired, or how she'd hum when trying to decide on something important. They met at a design pitch for a new luxury housing development in Soho. She wasn't supposed to get it. She was competing with 3 major agencies. But when she finished her presentation and began packing her notes, he followed her out. "You know what sold me?" She turned. "I thought I lost it." He smiled. "No, it was when you said, 'A home should never speak louder than the people who live in it.' That line's been echoing in my head all week." She raised a brow. "That's not on any of the slides." "Exactly." He invited her to lunch, then to walk around the city, then to spend time at his brownstone in Brooklyn, where he revealed he still loved old books and jazz and hated small talk. He wasn't like the CEOs people warned her about. He wasn't loud. He wasn't careless. He moved with deliberation. He looked at her like she wasn't furniture in his space, but something he was learning how to sit beside. 9 months later, they were married. Quiet ceremony. Private vows. No media. They moved into a penthouse Kalen owned but rarely used. The floors were warm. The walls held space for her art. She began designing a nursery even before he asked. Not decorating, just dreaming. And then she asked the question she always imagined would lead to joy. "When do you want to start our family?" He paused, then smiled, but not with his eyes. "Let's wait a little," he said. "I want to enjoy you first." Her fingers froze mid-stroke on the edge of his suit sleeve. She nodded, but she felt it. A crack. He didn't say no. He didn't sound unsure. He sounded careful, measured, like someone calculating risk. Still, she told herself not to rush the moment. He was busy. He was building. When he said he needed time away, she understood. The company was expanding. The pressure was rising. He booked a weekend retreat in the Catskills, sent her the address, promised to rest and reflect. Nael stayed back. She used the time to finish a design project. She watered the indoor plants, cleaned the kitchen, folded his shirts, and on a whim, she framed a photo of them from a winter cabin trip. They were laughing, her cheeks rosy, his arms wrapped around her waist from behind. She paired it with a handwritten note. "Wherever you are, I hope you're not alone. Unless that's the peace you need. Love, N." She asked the driver to deliver it directly. He was discreet, reliable, but 3 hours later he called. "Ma'am?" "Yes, I'm here, but this isn't a retreat. It's Thorn Estate Towers." "What?" "It's a luxury condo in Manhattan, not upstate, private access only. I thought maybe I made a mistake, but—" Her throat tightened. "No, you didn't make a mistake." She didn't call Kaylin. She didn't demand answers. She got dressed, slowly, carefully, navy coat, no perfume, no heels, a flat black loafer and her hair tied back. She wore a wedding ring that suddenly felt borrowed. And then she drove herself to the address. The Thorn Estate Towers stood like a monument to the rich and guarded. You didn't get in without being someone, or being sent for. But when she walked up to the front desk and gave her name, the guard blinked, then nodded. "You're on file, ma'am. He left your name." Her pulse froze. She nodded politely. The elevator opened like it had been waiting. She stepped in. She stood alone. Just her breath, and the rising truth. When the elevator doors slid open to the penthouse, she didn't walk in like a wife. She walked in like a woman ready to face something she already knew, but needed to see. The apartment was silent. Nael stepped out of the private elevator into a place that smelled, too crisp to have been lived in by a man claiming to need rest. The floors gleamed, not a speck of dust on the counters. But it wasn't the cleanliness that bothered her. It was the smell, not her lavender linen spray, not his usual sandalwood cologne. Something floral, sweeter, faint hints of vanilla and baby powder in the air. She moved slowly, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to see everything clearly. No anger, no rush. Her breathing was steady. To her left, a narrow hall led to the living room. To the right, a pair of nude-colored ballet slippers rested by the wall. Child size, lightly worn. Her fingers brushed against the doorframe as she walked into the living space. Then she saw it. A large photo on the mantel above the fireplace. Kaylin, kneeling on a beach, holding a laughing little girl in a sundress. Her curls bounced wildly. His smile looked so natural it almost took Nael's breath. He had never smiled that way in any of their photos. Nael stepped closer. The child's eyes were green, just like his, and the woman who stood behind them, tall, elegant, her arm resting gently on Kaylin's shoulder, wore the same silk scarf Nael now saw folded on the armrest of the couch. A low piano melody hung in the room, not from speakers, from real sheet music, half open on a piano bench. The page read, "For Anis." A child's drawing was pinned to the fridge in crooked tape, a stick figure, family, daddy plus me, and a third figure, separate, no name, drawn with a question mark over her head. Nael's knees didn't buckle. Her heart didn't race. She had already been grieving. Now, she was confirming. She took out her phone, snapped to the drawing. Then the family photo. She didn't touch anything else. Not the scarf. Not the toothbrush in the master suite. Not the pink socks beside the bed. Everything in this apartment said they belonged here. She didn't. The master bedroom held no trace of her. The sheets were smooth, folded at the corners. A faint perfume lived on the pillows, light and unmistakably feminine. The bathroom cabinet held 2 toothbrushes, one white, one pink. A small glass cup held floss picks, a child's blue toothpaste and hair ties. There was no doubt. This wasn't a fling. This was a parallel life, one built carefully, away from her. Shielded, maintained, loved even. Nael stepped back out into the hallway, stared one more time at the photo. Kaylin's arm around that little girl's waist, his lips against her temple. A real kiss. A father's kiss. She wondered what the girl's name was. She wondered what story Kaylin told the woman who lived here. Did he say he was single, divorced, widowed? Did the woman know she existed? Nael closed her eyes. She hadn't come to confront. She came to see. She turned, walked out the way she came, and rode the elevator down without looking back. The guard nodded as she passed. She nodded back. Back in her car, she didn't cry. She sat still, one hand on the wheel, one hand on her lap. The city moved around her. Horns, lights, movement. But inside that car, she sat in silence. She hadn't lost a husband. She had lost an illusion. That night, when she returned home, Caelan was already in bed. The lights were off. The kitchen was spotless. He looked up as she walked in. "You okay?" he asked, yawning. She smiled faintly. "Yeah, just tired." He reached out to touch her hand as she passed. She let him. "How was the retreat?" she asked softly. He sighed. "Peaceful. I needed it." She nodded. "You should rest." Nael went into the bathroom, removed her makeup, tied her hair, and stared at herself in the mirror. For the first time, she saw something different in her own reflection. Not sadness, not weakness, not even betrayal. She saw control. A woman who had held her silence in the face of a lie that could have destroyed her. And now? She would use that silence to leave without noise. She slept beside him that night, turned to her side, held her own wrist. She had 3 weeks of paperwork to handle. The first week, she began moving her personal savings into a private account he couldn't trace. She visited the bank during work hours, changed her emergency contact, removed his name from her health insurance. She called a lawyer. Quiet, efficient, paid in full for confidentiality. She never raised her voice, never skipped a dinner, never missed a goodnight kiss. He didn't know anything had changed. He never noticed her looking at him longer than necessary, memorizing the way he walked, how he laughed at his phone, what time he showered. She memorized everything, not out of love, out of clarity. Week 2, she stopped scheduling couples' brunches, let his calendar dictate their meetings. She waited for him to mention the next trip. He didn't, but when he claimed he had a board dinner and came home late, she simply smiled. "You smell like steak," she joked. "Ribeye," he laughed, kissing her forehead. "You know me too well." She didn't flinch. Week 3, she drafted the letter. No emotion, no explanation, just the truth. "I met your other life. I didn't break your things. But you broke trust. I hope your daughter never finds out what betrayal looks like from her mother's side. I won't be used to cover what you're ashamed to show. You taught me how much people hide. I'll never hide again. Nael." She placed it in an envelope, wrote his name on the front in ink. On a Friday afternoon, she packed her bags. 1 suitcase, 1 carry-on, only what belonged to her. No wedding dress, no framed pictures, not the anniversary ring. She left that on the dresser. She set the envelope on his desk. She turned off the lights, closed the door quietly, and walked out of the life she had entered so gently and exited so powerfully. She didn't leave as a victim. She left as a woman who refused to be part of someone else's lie. Nael didn't tell anyone where she was going. She booked a one-way ticket to a quiet coastal town on the edge of Virginia, not the popular kind filled with beachfront tourists and polished boardwalks, but the kind where life slowed down without asking for permission. She chose it because no one there knew her, and because when she opened the map and closed her eyes, her finger landed there. That was enough. She rented a small beach house with white shutters and a porch swing that creaked with every breeze. The ocean was just beyond the dunes, far enough not to hear the waves constantly, but close enough that the air smelled like salt and possibility. The first morning she woke there. She sat on the edge of the bed, the silence unfamiliar. No Caelan getting dressed in the dark, no phone vibrating with work messages, no footsteps outside the hallway. She pressed her hand to her chest and waited to cry, waited for regret to surface, waited to feel something that would make her want to turn back. But it never came. Instead, a calm settled in. Not peace, not yet, but something near it. Like her body was making space for the absence of him. She didn't reach out to anyone from her past. Not even her best friend, Mira, not her cousin, who had once told her Kaylin was too clean to be trusted, not her former clients who had congratulated her on marrying up. She needed time, not comfort. She needed distance, not conversation. So she unpacked her few things: 2 dresses, 3 pairs of pants, 5 tops, comfortable shoes. She hung up the photo of her parents, the only one she took from the apartment. In it, they were sitting on a wooden bench outside their old home, her mother leaning into her father's chest, her father squinting into the sun. Both of them were gone now, and maybe that was why she'd stayed so long with Kaylin, because he was all the family she thought she had left. The town was quiet. Locals smiled without pressing. The grocery store clerk was an older woman named Dinah who wore bright lipstick and remembered everyone's name by the second visit. There was a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and butter every morning, a small hardware store, 1 pharmacy, a library no bigger than a 2-bedroom apartment, and there was the cafe. It was painted blue, narrow, a hanging bell above the door. She noticed it because it didn't try to be noticed. She stepped in on her 4th day in town. The man behind the counter looked up with soft, steady eyes. Hazel, no ring, wore a canvas apron, button-down shirt rolled to his elbows. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning," she replied. No questions, no smile forced from politeness, just acknowledgement. "I'll have a tea," she said. He nodded. "Chamomile, okay?" "Perfect." She paid in cash. He handed her the cup. She turned to sit near the window. That was it. She didn't even ask his name. That night, she sat on her porch and replayed the simplicity of that moment. No tension, no hidden meanings, no silence heavy with secrets. She sipped her tea and let the warmth linger. Her phone stayed off. Her mind didn't race, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like a woman returning to herself. 1 week later, an envelope arrived. No stamp, no return address, just her name, written in handwriting she recognized instantly. She sat at her small kitchen table and opened it slowly. Inside was a single photo. Kaylin, standing beside the girl. Rhea. They were outside, possibly at a park. The little girl held a kite string, her curls tied back with the same ribbon from the photo in the penthouse. Kaylin was laughing, looking at her like she was the whole world. Nael turned the photo over. In careful handwriting, it read, "Her name is Rhea. I never told you because I was afraid you'd leave. I see now you already had." There was no, "I'm sorry," no explanation, just that. She set the photo down, breathed once, and went outside. That evening, she returned to the cafe. Same man behind the counter. He looked up, nodded again. "Welcome back." "Thank you." She sat at the same table, ordered the same tea. This time, she noticed the small notepad he scribbled on between customers. His handwriting was neat, his posture quiet, like someone who had stopped rushing life long ago. When she left, he didn't try to engage, but as she reached the door, he said, "You look like you're holding something in your chest." She turned, and the first, he nodded. "Don't let it get too heavy. Small towns like this, the wind carries everything eventually." She didn't respond, but she didn't forget the words either. The next morning, Nael returned to the cafe. She didn't plan to. She told herself she'd stay in, organize her studio corner, maybe walk the beach and breathe through the weight she hadn't fully processed. But something about that man's quiet comment, the way he'd said it without judgment, without pressing, kept echoing in her mind. So she went back, not to speak, just to sit. The same table near the window was free. She liked how the sunlight stretched across it. No one rushed her to order, and when she finally did, he placed her cup down without saying a word, but left a small honey packet beside it. A subtle offering. A pattern was forming. By the end of her 2nd week in town, she learned his name. Callan. Not because he told her, but because an elderly couple greeted him by it when they walked in for their usual half-slice pie and 2 teas. "Morning, Callan. You're spoiling us with this cinnamon peach today." He only smiled. Nael smiled too, not outwardly, internally. Something about his rhythm reminded her of what life looked like when no one was pretending. She stayed longer that day, opened her sketch pad, began a new concept for a coastal cabin, not for a client, but for herself. Just shapes and textures, wooden tones, open windows. She didn't notice when he came over. "You design?" She looked up, surprised. "Sometimes." He nodded toward the sketch. "That's not sometimes work." She closed the pad gently. "It's not for sale." He nodded. Didn't ask. There was a pause. Then, "I don't talk much," he said. "So people think I don't notice things. But I do." She waited. "You're not running from someone," he said quietly. "You're running from a version of yourself you never wanted to become." Her throat dried slightly. He didn't stare, didn't lean in. He simply placed a refill beside her tea, walked back to the counter. She sat there, unsure whether to feel comforted or exposed. But the truth, she felt seen, and it didn't terrify her. That night, she wrote in her journal, "First time in months. I met a man who speaks the way I used to think, not in answers, in pauses." 3 more days passed. She visited the library, bought a small plant for the kitchen window, started sleeping with the curtains open so the moonlight would wake her instead of her past. Then, one evening, after closing time, she walked by the cafe. The lights were off, except one near the back. She hesitated. She didn't want to intrude, but something pulled her toward the door. She tapped lightly. Callan looked up from behind the counter, surprised, but didn't look annoyed. He opened the door halfway. "Everything okay?" Nael nodded. "I forgot something." He raised a brow. "What?" "My breath." He paused, then stepped back. "Come in." She entered, sat on the same stool she always used. He made her tea without asking. This time, he sat across from her. The cafe was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. "I'm not here to explain," she said softly. "I don't have the words for the last 5 years. But I left a man who wore truth like cologne, only sprayed when someone got close." Callan didn't smile. He didn't look shocked. He simply whispered, "I know that kind of man." Her eyes met his. "I was never enough for him," she said. "You were too much," Callan replied. "Too real. And that's harder to perform around." She stared at the rim of her cup. "I walked into his second life by accident," she murmured. "I'm glad you walked out on purpose." They sat like that for almost 30 minutes. No need to fill the silence. Before she left, she placed her palm gently over the edge of the counter. "Thank you for saying nothing when I needed quiet more than advice." Callan gave a small nod. "You're welcome back any time, even when you don't want to speak." As she stepped out into the evening breeze, she realized something. She didn't feel heavy. She didn't feel lost. She felt in motion again, not running, not hiding, just walking. By the end of the month, she had turned the guest room in her beach house into a small studio. Her designs shifted, less clean lines, more warmth, less angles, more breath. She stopped thinking about Callan, not because she hated him, but because he no longer took up space in her reflection. She had made room for something else, for stillness that was hers, for connection not tied to performance, for someone who handed her tea and sat in silence and called it understanding. Have you ever walked away from someone who didn't lie with words, but with silence? Did you rebuild yourself in a quiet place, or are you still carrying what they left behind? Tell us in the comments. Your story might help someone still finding their way out. Like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories, where real hearts, real choices, and real lessons come alive through every scene. Nael hadn't cried once since leaving. Not when she packed. Not when she saw Ria's drawing. Not even when she walked into the penthouse and stared at a life that made her entire marriage feel like a placeholder. But one morning, 2 months into her new life, it happened. And it wasn't loud. She was watering the plant in her kitchen window. The sunlight poured in with quiet approval. She had slept well, eaten breakfast, even written in her journal. Then she saw it. A young girl outside, laughing with her father on the beach trail. Her curly hair bounced. Her dress caught the wind. He lifted her onto his shoulders and spun in a wide circle while the girl screamed with joy. Nael's hand stopped mid-air, still holding the watering can. That could have been her life. Not the money, not the beachfront walks. The bond, the child, the moments not built on secrets. Her eyes blurred. She didn't wipe them. She let the tears fall. Slow, warm, private. No sobs, no sound. Just a quiet goodbye to a dream that would never return. Later that day she went to the cafe. It was nearly empty. Callan was restocking the pastry shelves. When he looked up, he noticed her red eyes but didn't ask. Instead, he poured her tea before she ordered, left a second cup beside it, sat across from her. "I was 8, he said, unprompted. "When my father left my mother. No fight, no warning, just vanished. For years I thought it was because of me." Nael looked at him slowly. "I'm not sharing to compare," he added, "just to say, the silence they leave behind teaches you how to fill rooms with your own voice." She didn't respond, but for the first time, she nodded. It was the smallest act of agreement she'd made with anyone in months. That evening she walked along the shore. It was colder now. The tide stretched wide across the sand. Her shoes filled with grit, but she didn't care. She breathed deep and thought about how many lies are never spoken, only lived. Back at home, she made herself a meal. Simple pasta. Poured herself a glass of sparkling water. Lit a candle. Then she opened her laptop and clicked on her old client folder. For the first time since she left, she stared at her work without flinching. The style had changed. Back then, everything had been minimal, sleek, muted, almost like she was designing the kind of life she thought Callan wanted. Now, she wanted something different. Warm light, raw textures, imperfect edges, homes that felt like truth. She created a new folder, named it, Reclaimed, and began again. The next day, she showed Callan a sketch. "I'm rebuilding my portfolio," she said. "I need honest feedback." He studied it quietly, took his time, didn't rush to respond. "I'd live here," he finally said. "That's not feedback." He handed it back. "It is. You're designing safety." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "Some people design for status, others for approval. You're building places people want to heal in." She stared at him, the weight of his words landing deep. "You don't even know me," she said. "I don't need to," he replied. "I see it in your lines." The next time she returned to the cafe, something changed. Callan left the counter to sit beside her, not across. Their elbows touched slightly. Neither moved. They didn't talk for a while. Then, quietly, he said, "Do you miss him?" Nael didn't answer right away. "No," she finally said. "I miss who I thought he was." Callan nodded. "That version was real to you. For a while," she whispered. "The hardest part wasn't leaving. It was realizing I didn't know how to stop protecting someone who never protected me." He didn't respond. He just leaned closer. Not to kiss, not to crowd, but to remind her she wasn't alone at the table. The next morning, she returned to the cafe early. It wasn't open yet. She hadn't meant to come so soon, but sleep had left her before sunrise, and her feet carried her there like it was instinct. The bell above the door didn't chime. It was locked, but Callan was inside. He looked up from behind the counter and met her gaze through the glass. His expression didn't shift. He didn't look startled or annoyed. He unlocked the door slowly and pulled it open, wordlessly. She stepped in. He said nothing. Neither did she. But when he gestured for her to sit and slid a cup of tea in front of her, her shoulders relaxed for the first time that day. "I didn't come to talk," she said after a while. "I didn't open to listen," he replied softly. She smiled faintly. "That's supposed to be comforting." "It's supposed to be true." The cafe lights were still half-dimmed. The air smelled like cinnamon, coffee grounds and flour. No music played, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant cry of seagulls outside. Nael looked around, really looked. The cafe was worn in the best way. Imperfect tiles, smudges on the window corners, a slightly wobbly stool that no one complained about. It didn't try to impress. It simply existed. "I used to decorate spaces that looked nothing like this," she said. Callan raised an eyebrow. Everything was polished, chrome, grey, museum clean. It felt like, if you breathed wrong, the whole room would shift. "You mean rooms for people who didn't live in them?" "Exactly." She swirled the cup in her hand. "I think that's what my marriage was," she said quietly. "A perfect design for people who weren't living honestly inside it." Callan walked around the counter and leaned on the wall across from her. "You think he ever loved you?" Nael's eyes met his. There wasn't pain in her expression. Not anymore. Just clarity. "I think he loved how I fit his idea of together. I didn't ask questions. I didn't demand time. I didn't threaten to become more than he could manage." She paused. "I think he loved my silence." Callan exhaled slowly. "And now?" She sipped her tea. "Now I'm learning how to raise my own voice, even if no one hears it." The door creaked open. A woman with a bright scarf entered. Callan greeted her with a smile. "Morning, Lucy." Nael watched how he interacted. Soft, steady. A man who didn't need charm to be kind. Lucy glanced at Nael and smiled gently. "We've seen you around." Nael gave a nod. Trying to make that a habit, Callan handed Lucy her order and a small paper bag. When the woman left, Nael spoke again. "What happened to you?" Callan didn't flinch. "You mean, what broke me?" "No," she said. "What shaped you?" He looked at her for a long moment. "My brother died when I was 24. We were only a year apart. He was louder, bolder, reckless, but brilliant. He always said I was the shadow. After he passed, I thought I had to become both of us." Nael leaned in slightly. "Did you?" "No, I tried. I failed. Then I realized I was never meant to be two people. I was meant to be one honest one." She stared down at the steam rising from her tea. "That's the loneliest lesson, isn't it?" Callan nodded. "At first. Then it becomes the most freeing." Later that day, Nael returned home and opened her sketchpad again. But this time, she didn't design for someone else. Not for a client. Not for a company. Not for a memory of who she used to be. She sketched a kitchen with open shelving, a fireplace that wasn't centered, a bathroom with cracked tile floors. Intentional. Real. Grounded. Her lines were softer now. Less rigid. More human. She didn't know where this house existed, but she knew she would live in it, even if only on paper for now. That evening, she sat on her porch again. The breeze tugged at her sleeves. The ocean sounded like someone whispering through their sleep. She closed her eyes. For the first time, she thought about Ria, not with pain, but with tenderness. She wondered what the girl liked. If she liked music, if she drew, if she had questions her mother didn't answer fully. Nael would never reach out. That choice belonged to someone else. But she did whisper something under her breath. "I hope you never feel like someone's secret." Inside, she lit one candle, played soft instrumental music, cooked dinner without checking her phone once. Before bed, she wrote in her journal, "I am not waiting to be chosen anymore. I have already chosen myself." Nael woke to the sound of wind against her window. Not harsh, just steady, like it was reminding her that the world outside kept moving, even when she didn't. She slipped out of bed, wrapped herself in a thick cardigan, and made tea before the sun finished rising. Her phone was off again. She liked it that way. No one could reach her unless she allowed it. She sat at her kitchen table and watched the steam rise from her mug. It was a ritual now, and for once, her mornings didn't feel like recovery. They felt like arrival. But that didn't mean she was done healing. A letter arrived later that day, handwritten, no return address. But the script was unmistakably familiar. She didn't open it right away. She left it on the table, stared at it through lunch, ignored it during her walk, and finally opened it as the sun began to set. It was short. "You left without a fight. I thought you'd call me names. I thought you'd ruin everything. You didn't. And maybe that's worse. I miss you. See." She folded the paper once, then again, slid it into a drawer and closed it without a word. There was no apology, only ego. Kaelan didn't want her back. He wanted her to react, to scream, to explode, to let him play the role of the misunderstood man. But she'd given him no flames to feel burned by. She'd left the match unlit. And that silence, that power, was louder than anything she could have said. That night, she went to the cafe late. The town had quieted. Just a few lights remained on in corner windows. The streets glowed under flickering lamps. Her shoes pressed gently against the damp concrete. When she walked in, Callan looked up. He didn't ask anything. He just poured her usual, set it on the counter, sat across from her. They didn't speak for nearly 10 minutes. Then she said, "He wrote to me." Callan waited. No apology, no explanation. Just a reminder that I didn't burn the house down on my way out. And somehow, he thinks that means he deserves something. Callan nodded once. "You're not the first to deal with a man who mistakes silence for weakness." "I didn't leave to punish him," she whispered. "I left because I couldn't keep performing a part I never auditioned for." He studied her quietly. "You didn't just walk away. You walked up. You elevated yourself." She blinked. That's not what it felt like. It never does at first. Strength doesn't announce itself while you're using it. It only shows up after, when you look back and realize what you survived. They stayed like that a while. Nael didn't want pity. She didn't want advice. She just wanted to be near someone who didn't ask her to be okay. And Callan never did. When she left that night, he handed her a folded piece of paper. She opened it at home. It read, "You didn't lose him. You lost the version of yourself that thought you needed him." The next day, she went to the ocean. No shoes, no plan. She walked along the wet sand, letting the cold water nip at her ankles. The sky stretched open. The air was sharp but honest. There were no footsteps beside hers, no one watching her from behind. But she didn't feel alone. She felt herself, and that, after everything, was finally enough. The next morning, Nael cleaned out the last box from the closet. She had avoided it since the day she moved in. Not because it scared her, but because it carried everything she thought she might still need. If she ever decided to go back, now she knew she never would. Inside were small things. A gift receipt for a watch she never gave him. Their wedding photo in a frame she didn't remember packing. A dried flower from a dinner he once called the most peaceful night of his year. It had all meant something, but not enough. She laid the items out gently, took a photo of them, and placed each one back in the box. Then she taped it shut, wrote no name, no address, and left it by her front door. She'd take it to the donation center in the morning. Not because anyone would want what was inside, but because it was time to let the weight of it leave her home. That evening, she walked to the cafe just before closing. Callan was mopping the floor. The lights were low. He looked up and smiled. "You're late," he said. She smirked. "You're still here." He leaned on the counter. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated. "I want to tell you something. Not for advice. Just to say it out loud. I'm here." She exhaled. "I don't think I ever loved Kaelan. I think I loved the way I felt beside him. Needed, quiet, purposeful. But the person I was with him, she was always walking behind." Callan didn't interrupt. "I thought I was protecting something sacred. Our marriage, his image, the life we were building. But in truth, I was protecting him from the truth. And protecting myself from starting over." Callan stepped around the counter. He didn't touch her. He didn't crowd. He just stood close. "You've already started over," he said gently. She looked up. "And you're doing it without lies." The walk home was cool. The street was quiet. The moonlight cast soft shadows through the trees. Nael felt something different that night. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was stillness. The kind that came not from silence, but from no longer carrying a story that didn't belong to her. She unlocked her door, stepped inside, and turned off the porch light. The house felt whole, even with no one else in it. Before bed, she wrote again. He sent me a letter, hoping to disturb my peace. But I don't live where he left me anymore. I moved. She closed the journal, turned out the lamp, and slept deeply. For the first time in years, she didn't dream about being left. She dreamed about being found, by herself. It started with a headline. Nael wasn't looking for it. She was searching for a reclaimed wood vendor near town when a real estate article caught her eye. Drex Holdings expands to West Coast, amid leadership shift. Her hand hovered over the mouse. She didn't click it, but she stared at it for a while. Leadership shift? She closed the tab and walked away. She wasn't curious about the business. She didn't care about the expansion. What lingered was the quiet truth tucked in the phrase, he wasn't in control anymore. And it didn't happen because she exposed him. It didn't happen because she dragged his name through the press. It happened without her needing to lift a hand. That was the power of leaving without destroying. That night, she received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something told her to. A pause. A breath. Then, Nael. The voice was soft, woman, strained. Yes? I don't know if this is right. I shouldn't be calling. But my name is Ivana. She paused. I'm Ria's mother. Nael went still. Not out of fear, not from anger, but from the depth of something she hadn't touched yet. Grief for another woman who had also been living a version of her lie. I found a letter you wrote, or at least part of it. It was tucked behind a drawer. He must have kept it. Nael didn't speak. Ivana continued. I didn't know about you. I didn't know there was a marriage. I thought I was the one he kept hidden. But now I'm not sure who was real and who was pretend. Still, Nael said nothing. I left, Ivana whispered. I left after Ria asked me why Daddy only hugs her when no one's looking. Nael's chest tightened. I wanted to say, thank you, for disappearing the way you did, for not dragging it all into the light. You gave me the room to leave too. Nael finally found her voice. I didn't do it for you, she said. I did it for me. But I'm glad it helped you. There was silence on the other end. Then, she talks about you. Ria. She says she saw you once and asked if you were a teacher or a cloud. Nael's eyes welled. What did you tell her? I said you were someone her father didn't deserve. They ended the call with no promises, no future plans. Nael placed her phone on the table and leaned back. It felt like something had closed, not a door. A chapter. The next day, she walked to the edge of the beach at sunrise. She wrote Ria's name in the sand, watched the tide erase it gently, then walked away. Not because she wanted to forget her, but because she needed to remember herself more. The call with Ivana stayed with her. Not like an echo, more like a shift. Something had realigned inside her, even if she didn't fully understand it yet. Nael moved through her day slower than usual. Not heavy, not distracted, just reflective. She walked to the small bookshop she'd passed a dozen times but never entered. The bell above the door jingled. The scent of paper and wood filled the air. She wasn't looking for anything. She simply wanted to be surrounded by stories that weren't hers. A section near the back caught her eye. Journals, blank sketchbooks, leather-bound, hand-stitched. She ran her fingers along the spines, stopped at one with a plain navy cover and thick pages. She bought it without flipping it open. Back home, she opened the new journal and titled the first page, Letters I'll Never Send. She didn't start with Kaylin. She started with Ria. You'll never know me, but I saw your smile once, and it broke me open in the softest way. You're the part of his story that should have been told with pride, not hidden behind passwords and false business trips. You're not his mistake. You're his consequence, and you deserve to know what truth feels like. If life is kind, I hope you never become a woman who has to write letters like this. But if you do, I hope you write them with fire in your voice and peace in your chest. She didn't cry as she wrote. She didn't stop either. 3 letters. 4. By sunset, She had filled 20 pages, not for answers, not for revenge, but for clarity. She was telling herself the truth, fully, for the first time. Later that evening, she heard a knock at the door. Soft, 2 short taps. She opened it. Callan stood there, hands in his pockets, eyes unreadable. "I closed early," he said. Nael tilted her head. "That's new. I wanted to walk." She stepped aside. "You want company?" He looked at her for a moment, then nodded once. They walked in silence down the shore path. The sun was dipping low, casting long shadows. He didn't ask what was on her mind. She didn't ask why he came, but at some point, without either of them saying a word, their hands brushed, then held. She looked down at their fingers. No tension, no need, just touch. He didn't speak until they reached the bend in the trail where the ocean stretched wide and open. "She called, didn't she?" he asked. Nael didn't pretend not to know who he meant. "Yes," he nodded. "You okay? I thought it would make me angry, or sad, or jealous. And it made me grateful that I left before I became more than just his mirror, before I became unrecognizable to myself." Callan stared at the horizon. Some people are good at using love as a smokescreen. They give just enough to keep you hoping, but never enough to keep you whole. Nael exhaled. He was good at that. Callan looked at her. "You're better without him. I'm better without pretending." They stood there as the sky turned orange, then gold. Nael turned to face him. "You always show up when I least expect you." "I don't show up," he replied. "I stay nearby. You decide when I get closer." She smiled at that. The truth of it. They walked back slowly. The town lights blinked on. A few neighbors waved. The sound of the tide followed them like background music. When they reached her porch, she turned to him. "You want to come in?" He didn't move forward. "I do," he said honestly. "But not tonight." She nodded. No offense. No rejection. "Why not?" "Because this moment is whole already," he said. "And I don't want to rush what's already beautiful." She blinked, then nodded again. "Okay." He squeezed her hand once before stepping back. "I'll see you tomorrow. Same cafe?" He smiled. "Always." Nael watched him walk down the street, hands back in his pockets, steps slow and unforced. She didn't rush inside. She stood on her porch and watched the stars come out, one by one. That night, she wrote one last letter, to the version of me who waited too long to speak. "I forgive you. You weren't weak. You were careful. You weren't blind. You were hopeful. You weren't lost. You were patient. But now, you're free." She closed the journal, turned off the light, and went to bed with a steady heart. Nael didn't expect anything to happen that morning. She followed her routine like always, woke before sunrise, brewed tea, sat by the window as the town stretched into motion. The air was crisp. The sky was clean. It felt like another page in a story she was slowly rewriting. But that morning, something waited at her door. A package, no return label, no note, just her name, written in black ink on the top. She carried it inside with both hands, set it on the table, stared at it for a long moment, then opened it. Inside was a hardcover book, a limited edition photography journal titled Private Spaces, Design in Hidden Corners. She knew the book. She had tried to order it 6 months ago before it sold out. There was no signature, no note tucked inside, nothing in the packaging. But there was no doubt in her mind. It was from him. She turned the book over. The cover was untouched, the seal still on, but it didn't feel like a gift. It felt like a tether, a silent reminder of what he thought still connected them. She stood up, walked to her fireplace, and placed it in the small wooden crate she used for kindling. She didn't burn it. She just didn't put it on her shelf either. At the cafe, Callan noticed the slight tension in her shoulders. He didn't mention it. Instead, he handed her tea and said, "You look like someone who made a decision." She smirked. "I made one this morning. Was it hard?" No, she said. What's hard is realizing how long I've made decisions based on someone else's feelings. He nodded. And now I do it based on mine. She paused, then added, I'm tired of being polite about my peace. Later that day, she met with a potential client, a local couple renovating an old cottage on the edge of the cliffside. They wanted someone who could bring warmth to a cold space, someone who didn't just decorate, but translated emotion into texture. Nael listened to them speak for 30 minutes. Then she pulled out her sketch pad and began drawing as they talked. By the time they finished, she slid the page across the table. The wife gasped softly. The husband leaned in. This feels like us, he said. Nael gave a small smile. Then I'm the right fit. That evening, she walked along the beach path again. It was becoming a ritual, the slow unraveling of her thoughts as the tide mirrored her breathing. Callan found her there, not by plan. He walked beside her in silence for a few steps, before speaking. Do you want to talk about it? Nael shook her head. Not really. He nodded. Then we won't. But after a pause, she spoke anyway. He sent something. A book I once mentioned. Callan's jaw tightened slightly. He's still trying to be present without accountability. She looked up at him. Do you ever think people like that change? He didn't answer immediately. I think people adapt, especially when they lose access. But real change? That only comes when they lose the illusion that they were ever right to begin with. Nael swallowed. I don't think he's lost that yet. Callan looked at her. You have? They sat on the rocks near the shore. The sky was turning orange, the sea catching pieces of it and scattering them like fire across the water. Nael turned to Callan. I want to ask something. Go ahead. Why haven't you ever tried to pull me closer? To claim me? He met her gaze, steady. Because you're not something to claim, Nael, and because I don't want to be the next silence you live inside of. She blinked slowly. He continued, I'd rather walk beside you than stand in your way, even if that means waiting longer than I want to. Nael looked out at the ocean. Then keep walking, she said. And he did. The next morning, she mailed a package. It was small, wrapped neatly, no letter inside, just the book, no return address, no explanation. She simply sent it back, not to spark anything, but to close a door gently and walk away from it for good. Nael spent the rest of that week in motion. It wasn't about distraction. It was about creation, about reclaiming space that used to feel too quiet. Her project with the cliffside cottage clients moved forward faster than she expected. They trusted her completely. That trust was something she hadn't felt in a long time. She sourced reclaimed wood from a nearby salvage yard, chose sea-toned tiles for the kitchen backsplash, and hand-sketched an open shelving layout that allowed for mismatched mugs and lived-in warmth. She wasn't just designing a house. She was designing safety, reflection, realness. Everything she had once begged for in a marriage, now built into walls, cabinets, and morning light. One afternoon, while painting sample swatches on the cottage walls, her phone buzzed. Mira, her best friend from back home, the one she hadn't called since leaving. Nael hesitated, then answered. Hey. Silence. Then, you sound good. Nael let out a soft laugh. I'm getting there. Where are you? Somewhere that lets me breathe. Mira was quiet. Then, I saw him. Nael tensed. Where? A conference in Seattle. He was speaking on stage, smiling, talking about growth and legacy. Like none of it ever happened. Nael looked out the window at the sea. That sounds like him. Mira sighed. I wanted to throw my drink at him. Nael smiled faintly. Thank you for not. You deserve more, Nael. I know that now. A pause. Then Mira said, I'm proud of you, and I miss you. Nael's eyes warmed. I miss you too. They ended the call softly. No pressure, no pushing. But it felt like another part of her life was gently returning. Not the past, but the parts that had always loved her right. That evening, Callan showed up at her door. She hadn't expected him, but she didn't mind. He held a tray with 2 cups of tea and a brown paper bag. I figured you worked late. You forget to eat when you're sketching. She stepped aside. "You're not wrong." They sat at her small kitchen table, the candlelight flickering low. Inside the bag was fresh bread and lentil stew from the cafe kitchen. She took a bite and for a moment said nothing. Then, "I spoke to someone today." He waited. "My best friend. First time in months." She told me she saw him, said he looked untouched, like none of it touched him. Callan's voice was calm. "Some people build their lives with waterproof paint, but that doesn't mean the rot isn't under the surface." Nael nodded slowly. "It's strange. I used to need to be seen to feel worthy. Now, I don't want him to see me at all." Callan met her eyes. "Good." They didn't talk for a while after that. Later, as he got up to leave, she walked him to the door. He paused. "I can go now, or I can stay and not touch you." She tilted her head. "Why would you say that?" "Because I don't want you to confuse comfort with closeness. I know what it took for you to stop needing noise to feel safe." Her chest tightened. She reached for his hand, not to pull, but to hold. "I don't confuse you for noise," she said. He stepped forward. Slowly, close enough that she felt the warmth of his breath, but not enough to make her move back. "Then let me stay." In silence. No agenda. She nodded once. And he did. They sat on the couch. No music. No television. Just the dim glow of the lamp and the sound of the sea through the open window. At one point, she leaned against him. Her head found the curve of his shoulder, like it had always known where to rest. He didn't kiss her. He didn't shift. He simply stayed. And in that stillness, she realized something she hadn't felt in years. She was safe. Have you ever returned something quietly? Not to get even, but to get free. Some goodbyes don't need words. Some peace doesn't need to be loud. Sometimes, silence is the closure. Tell us in the comments, what helped you finally choose yourself? Like, share, and subscribe to Mr. Charles' Stories, where quiet strength, healing, and real love always find a voice. Nael woke before the sun, but not from restlessness, from clarity. The kind that settles in after months of emotional noise have finally quieted. The kind that doesn't ask questions anymore. She stepped out onto her porch with a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of tea warming her hands. The ocean whispered, like always. Familiar, grounding. Her phone was charging by the window. She hadn't touched it all morning, and she didn't plan to. When the town finally stirred, she went for a walk. No destination, just movement. She passed the bakery. The owner waved through the window. She waved back. She turned down the street toward the cafe. The chairs were already outside. The smell of roasted beans floated through the air. Inside, Callan stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hands moving with quiet rhythm. He looked up the second she entered. His eyes softened. "You slept?" She nodded. Deeply, he poured her usual. "That's a good sign." They didn't sit right away. She leaned on the counter. He leaned back. There was no tension, just ease. Then she said, "I think I want to stay." Callan stilled. "Here? In this town? In this space? In this version of myself?" His shoulders relaxed. He smiled, slowly. "I hoped you would." She raised an eyebrow. "You did?" "I didn't come close to someone temporary, Nael." The way he said her name, firm but reverent, made her chest rise a little fuller. Then, "What do we do with this?" He walked around the counter, closed the distance between them. "We let it unfold," he said, "with no deadlines, no rehearsals." She nodded. "I can do that." Later that afternoon, they drove to a nearby flea market. Callan wanted new mugs for the cafe. Nael came along to supervise his taste. They walked between booths, side by side, shoulders brushing occasionally. Every now and then, someone from the town nodded to them. She noticed it, how they were starting to be seen as a we, even before they declared anything. At one table, she spotted a deep green ceramic mug with a gold crack running down its side, intentionally sealed with resin, the imperfection highlighted instead of hidden. "This one," she said, holding it up. He glanced at it, then at her. You'd choose the flawed one. She smiled. No. I'd choose the one that was honest about being broken. He bought 6 of them. On their way home, they didn't say much. The windows were down. The sky was starting to change. But at a red light, he said, I used to be angry at the world. Then I got tired of anger. It never gave me anything back. Nael turned toward him. What gave you something back? He glanced at her, eyes steady. Stillness. And people who didn't force me to be louder than I am. She leaned her head back, closed her eyes for a moment. I think I spent so long trying to be small enough to keep love. Now I just want to be seen without shrinking. You are, he said softly. They unloaded the mugs at the cafe. She lingered behind, wiping down a corner shelf while he swept. Then she asked, if this is the start of something, does it scare you? He stopped sweeping. No, he said. It humbles me. She nodded. Me too. That night, she walked home alone. Not because she needed space from him, but because she wanted to feel every step. Her feet on familiar ground, her breath steady, her heart full but not overwhelmed. And in her chest, a quiet certainty bloomed. She was choosing this, with her eyes open, and no one else's permission. The next morning, the wind carried a different kind of stillness, one that made Nael feel like something was about to shift, but not in a way that unsettled her. It felt more like confirmation. She had slept without dreams, woken without weight, and as she tied her robe and poured herself a fresh cup of tea, she realized her first thought hadn't been of Kaelan. It hadn't been of loss. It had been of what to do with the rest of her day. That was progress. At noon, she met with her cottage clients for a second walkthrough. The space had come alive. Light warmed the living room through wide windows. The kitchen was nearly complete, and the scent of new wood filled the air. The wife turned to her, eyes glistening. This is more than a renovation, she whispered. It feels like coming home to a version of us we forgot existed. Nael didn't respond right away. She took that in. Let it settle. Then she said, that's what it felt like to draw it. The husband added, whatever you carry, you build into your designs. And it's good. It's honest. Nael walked outside after they left and sat on the porch. The sea shimmered in the distance. She pulled out her sketchbook and scribbled a few lines, then paused, then wrote a single sentence. I am no longer designing around damage. I am designing from strength. Later that day, Callan showed up with 2 paint-splattered lids in hand. I need you to settle a disagreement between me and myself, he said. She chuckled, letting him in. Okay, let's hear it. One's bold, one's soft. I like both. I don't trust either. She led him to the table. He laid the lids side by side. One was a deep forest green. The other, a warm grey with subtle brown undertones. This for the cafe? He nodded. Feature wall. She leaned in, touched both, then pointed to the warm grey. That one. The green will demand attention. This one will make people stay longer without knowing why. He grinned. You know, I hired you without paying. She smirked. You pay in peace. He laughed under his breath. Fair deal. They ate dinner on her porch that evening. Bread, soup, soft music playing from her small speaker. Callan leaned against the post, sipping from one of the new mugs. This is the first time in years I haven't felt the need to be needed. Nael glanced at him. That a good thing? It's the best thing. She set down her glass. I used to think intimacy was about proving your worth, but now, I think it's about being willing to stay with someone while they remember it. Callan looked at her like he'd been waiting to hear those words. You don't owe me your healing, he said. She smiled. And that's why I trust you with it. As the sky turned dusky, they moved inside. She lit 2 candles, turned off the ceiling light. The room glowed amber. Callan sat on the couch. She joined him, slowly, her knees brushing his. He didn't reach for her. He waited. When she leaned her head against his chest, he adjusted only enough to hold her without restraint. They sat like that, still, unforced. And she thought, maybe for the first time in her life, I don't want to run from this. He didn't stay the night. Not because he didn't want to, but because they both understood. When something is finally healthy, you don't rush its shape. You grow into it. With care. With time. Nael stepped into the library for the first time in weeks. She hadn't meant to stay away. Life had simply started filling up. With design work, cafe evenings, slow walks, long conversations, and even longer silences that didn't ask for more. But today, she needed the library. Not for books, for stillness, for a table near the window where the light didn't judge her. She pulled out her journal and stared at a blank page for several minutes. Then she wrote, "Peace isn't what happens when the pain ends. It's what grows when the pretending does." She closed the journal without signing the entry. Some truths didn't need her name stamped beneath them. As she stepped out into the street, a familiar voice called her name. Nael. She turned and spotted Mira across the road, waving with both arms and already crossing before the traffic light had even changed. Nael smiled. "You're insane. I'm alive." Mira grinned, wrapping her in a tight hug. "And you're glowing. You didn't even post a thing." "I haven't been posting anything," Nael said. "It's been nice." Mira pulled back to look at her face. "I can see that." They walked together toward the cafe. Nael didn't ask why she was in town. She didn't need a reason. The visit felt right, like the universe confirming she had finally created space for people who never needed her to perform. Inside the cafe, Callan greeted Mira with his usual soft nod. "You must be Mira," he said. Mira raised an eyebrow. "You must be Callan." Nael bit back a grin. Callan handed her a menu. "Everything's good, but the pie today was made with someone on my mind." Mira looked at Nael. "He's poetic. I like him." Nael shrugged. "I warned you." They ordered, ate, talked about nothing and everything. Mira never once brought up Callan. She didn't have to. There was no place for him in this room anymore. Later, on the walk back to Nael's house, Mira said, "You built a new life without fireworks." Nael looked at her. "Is that a compliment?" "It's the best one," Mira said. "You didn't need a spectacle to survive. You chose soft rebuilding. That takes more strength than revenge ever will." Nael stopped in front of her gate. "I still think about her sometimes. Ria." Mira touched her arm gently. "Of course you do. But thinking about someone doesn't mean you're still bleeding." Nael stared out at the water. "I hope she feels safe. That's all I care about now." Mira nodded. "She will. Because someone who loved her chose to walk away quietly instead of adding more damage." That night, Nael sat with Callan on the porch. She didn't tell him everything about Mira's visit. She didn't need to. But she did tell him something she hadn't admitted aloud before. "I used to think my value came from being useful, quiet, steady. That love was something I had to earn through behavior. I didn't realize I was enough just breathing." Callan reached over and placed his hand on hers. "You're not just enough, Nael. You're the standard." She looked at him. And in that moment, she knew. She didn't just want this life. She had chosen it, with all of her. The next morning, Nael stood in front of her mirror a little longer than usual. She wasn't checking for flaws. She wasn't deciding on the right shade of lipstick or whether her blouse needed to be tucked in. She was simply looking at herself. She ran a hand over her collarbone, then down her arm. Not out of vanity, out of recognition. This body had carried her through heartbreak, through silence, through change, and now, through healing. She was still here, still standing, still choosing herself. She met Mira for brunch at the Cliffside Diner. It overlooked the water. No reservations, no cloth napkins, just strong coffee and the kind of food that didn't apologize for its weight. They ordered omelets and laughed through bites. Mira told her stories about their college days, ones Nael had forgotten or maybe buried, beneath years of trying to become the woman she thought she was supposed to be. At one point, Mira looked up and said, "You haven't checked your phone once." Nael blinked. "Didn't even think about it." "Exactly," Mira said, smiling. "You're present now. You're in your life. After they finished, they walked the trail behind the diner. It led to a bluff where the wind rolled in heavy and wild. Mira tossed off her shoes and let her toes dig into the earth. Nael followed. "Do you ever wish you could rewrite parts of your life?" Nael asked. Mira didn't answer immediately. She stared at the horizon, then said, "No. I think pain writes the parts of us we can't fake. I don't want to erase that. I want to build around it." Nael let those words settle, because she didn't want to rewrite her life either. She just wanted to live it now, without hiding. Later that day, Callan invited them both to the cafe for a soft launch of his new space, a corner he had redesigned based on her suggestion. The warm grey wall now held framed sketches by local artists. Plants hung from reclaimed wood beams, and in the center sat a bookshelf, where anyone could leave or take a book, no questions asked. It felt like more than design. It felt like intention. Nael watched as Mira scanned the shelves. Callan walked over and quietly handed Nael a small framed print. She turned it over and read the words, "Peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the courage to stop translating yourself for people who never asked to understand you." She blinked, then looked up at him. "You wrote this?" He nodded. "I'm putting it in my studio," she whispered. Callan didn't smile for praise. He just said, "I meant it for you." That night, Mira left. They hugged outside Nael's house. Not the rushed kind of hug that says keep in touch, but the kind that holds time without pressure. "I'm proud of you," Mira said. "Not just for leaving, but for staying gone." Nael nodded. "That was the hard part. You made it look like the quiet part." Nael smirked. "That's because I had help." She watched Mira's car disappear into the distance before walking back inside. And when she shut the door, her home didn't feel like a pause in her life. It felt like the center of it. She found Callan waiting on the porch. No phone, no clock, just him, sitting. "Everything okay?" she asked, settling beside him. He shrugged. "I don't always know how to talk about good things. I used to brace for the next blow." She turned toward him. "You're allowed to stop bracing now." He looked at her, and this time he didn't ask. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to shift away. She didn't. Their lips met, not with urgency, but with memory, like a touch that knew its place before it arrived. When they pulled apart, she didn't speak. She just rested her forehead against his. "You've never been something I had to survive," she whispered. "And you never will," he replied. That night, he stayed, not because they needed to prove anything, but because, for the first time, the space between them asked for no explanations, only truth and presence. Nael didn't wake up startled. She didn't wake up worried. She opened her eyes to soft morning light stretching across the ceiling, the sound of the ocean faint in the distance, and Callan's quiet breathing beside her. He was still asleep. His arm lay relaxed across his chest, his body turned toward her. And in that stillness, she realized something important. She didn't feel claimed. She felt considered. She watched him for a moment, not to memorize him, but to witness the peace between them. Then she quietly slipped out of bed. Downstairs, she brewed tea. The scent of cinnamon drifted into the kitchen air. She moved through the house as if it were her own, because it was, not borrowed, not hidden, not temporary. She sat by the window and opened her journal. "This isn't a reward. This is a return. To myself. To who I would have been if love hadn't asked me to shrink." Callan joined her an hour later, still barefoot, eyes soft with sleep. He kissed her cheek and poured himself a cup of tea before sitting beside her. They didn't speak for a while. Finally he said, "You write a lot." She nodded. "I never used to. Not when I was with him. Everything I wrote back then felt like proof that I could be enough, that I could be gentle, that I could be small." Callan looked at her. "You're not small." "I know," she said. Now, she spent the afternoon meeting with her clients to finalize the cottage handoff. The project was complete. The couple walked through the space with slow reverence, marveling at the way it felt familiar, lived in, even before they'd moved anything in. The wife hugged her tightly. "You gave us more than a home. You gave us something we thought we'd lost, belief that we could still change how we live. Nael smiled. That's what design should do. As they left, the husband handed her a sealed envelope. For you. No strings, just thanks. She didn't open it right away. She drove home in silence, the envelope on the passenger seat, untouched. That evening, she and Callan sat outside, watching the town settle down around them. The streetlights glowed amber. The trees swayed gently. Someone's dog barked in the distance. Nael opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note and a check. The amount made her breath catch. It wasn't what they'd agreed on. It was more, a lot more. The note read, "You built something we didn't know how to ask for. We'd rather overpay than ever undervalue you." Callan leaned over. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "I've spent most of my life being told not to ask for too much. This feels like proof I wasn't wrong to want more." He smiled. "You still haven't asked for anything." She looked at him, then whispered, "I'm asking now." Callan leaned in, not to interrupt, but to say yes. Later that night, she walked the beach alone, not because she needed space from Callan, but because she wanted to stand alone with herself and not feel empty. She stepped into the tide, let the water kiss her ankles, and then she said out loud, "I forgive you." It wasn't for Callan. It wasn't even for Ivana. It was for the version of herself who had accepted less because she thought it was love. Nael returned home with sand still between her toes. She had walked the entire stretch of shoreline barefoot, letting the tide press into her steps, letting the cold water remind her that healing wasn't always warm, but it was always real. She entered the house and didn't bother to turn on the lights. The sun still poured through the windows. Soft, orange, patient. She moved through the quiet, set her journal on the coffee table, and pulled out a sheet of sketch paper instead. She didn't know what she was about to draw, but her hands moved anyway. Not for a client, not for a brand, not for an audience, just for her. Lines turned into soft arches, windows without curtains, a wide door open to the sea, books stacked imperfectly, rugs that didn't match, lighting that didn't aim to impress, just to warm. She labeled the drawing, "My Own House." For years, she had drawn houses for people trying to prove something. Now, she was drawing a home that had nothing to hide. Later that night, she cooked dinner with Callan. They moved around each other without needing words, handing off spoons, nudging elbows, tasting sauces, adjusting heat. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was secure. After they ate, she leaned back in her chair, full and soft and quietly whole. "I think I'm done mourning him," she said. Callan looked up, not surprised, just listening. "It took me a while to realize. I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the woman I thought I had to be to keep him." Callan reached across the table, not to interrupt, just to hold. Nael placed her hand in his. "I'm not that woman anymore," she said, "and I don't want to become her ever again." "You won't," he said. "You're not walking in circles. You're walking forward." The next day, she received a letter, not from Callan, not from Ivana, but from a publisher. Months ago, she had submitted a small portfolio of written reflections and visual sketches to a journal that spotlighted quiet living and design as emotional recovery. She had forgotten about it completely. The letter read, "Your submission stood out. It wasn't loud, it was true. We'd love to feature your story, words and art, in our upcoming issue titled Returning Home to Self." Nael stared at the paper. Her words, her healing, her quiet journey. Someone had seen it, not for the performance, but for the presence. She placed the letter on her desk and took a long, steady breath. At the cafe, Callan was restocking a shelf. She walked in and didn't speak until he looked up. "I said yes." He raised an eyebrow. "To what?" "To sharing my story, publicly." He smiled. "Good. I was afraid I'd be exposing myself." "You're not. What if he reads it? Then he'll finally know the one thing he never understood." She tilted her head. "What's that?" Callan stepped close. "That you didn't break. You broke free." That evening, They sat on the beach again. No plans, no titles, no expectations. Nael leaned against him and whispered, "This is the first time I've ever felt safe enough to just be." Callan looked at her, not with possession, but with pride. "You are not a recovery," he said. "You are a revelation." Callan's mother walked into the cafe just before closing. She wore the same cream cardigan she always did, the same delicate silver chain with a pendant the shape of a crescent moon. But tonight, her eyes held something different. Not suspicion, not worry, something softer. Nael saw her from across the counter and gently closed the ledger she'd been reviewing. "Evening," she greeted with a small smile. Callan's mother didn't answer right away. She walked up to the counter, set her bag down, and looked Nael in the eyes. "I read your essay," she said. Nael's spine straightened. "I wasn't sure I'd recognize myself in it," she added. "But I did." Nael blinked. I was that woman once," the older woman said, voice low, "holding on to a man who had no idea how to hold me, thinking silence made me strong, thinking forgiveness meant staying." Nael swallowed hard. "But you did what I never had the courage to do." A pause. "You walked away." Callan's mother exhaled. "And now I finally understand why my son looks at you like that." Nael didn't move. "Like you're home," the woman whispered. That weekend, Nael didn't go back to the city. She stayed. She painted. She helped Callan close the cafe early one night and made him try 4 different kinds of hot chocolate until he admitted hers was better. They slow danced in the tiny living room with music playing low on a speaker. She fell asleep on his couch. He didn't touch her. He just watched her breathe, like it mattered. The next morning, Callan got a call from the local high school. Their guest speaker for the Career Day event had cancelled last minute. Someone recommended him. "About what?" he asked. "About purpose. About staying in town when everyone's told you to leave." Callan agreed, but only on one condition. He wasn't going alone. Nael stood on that auditorium stage with him, both holding mugs of coffee, both wearing jeans, both completely themselves. She shared how architecture once meant ego, but now meant restoration. He talked about how the cafe had saved his life twice, once when he inherited it, and again when she walked through its doors. They didn't pretend to be perfect. They told the truth. Students listened. Teachers nodded. One girl cried quietly. After the event, a boy walked up to Nael with a sketch pad. He held it out. "I want to be like you," he said. "But not famous. Just okay." Nael bent to meet his eyes. "You already are." The following week, the magazine issue arrived in print. Nael didn't check the article first. She turned to the back, where the editor had written a dedication, "To those who left to protect their peace, and to those brave enough to stay and rebuild it." Callan set up a reading for her at the cafe. He didn't announce it publicly. He didn't post flyers. He just called a few people who mattered, the ones who'd seen her quiet return, who had made space for her without needing details. That night, she read from her piece, voice calm, steady, and afterward, she answered questions, not about what happened, but about what helped. "Where did you find your strength?" one woman asked. Nael glanced at Callan. "It wasn't one place," she said. "It was every small moment I chose not to shrink." Later that night, Callan handed her a small envelope. "Another letter?" she asked. "No," he said. "Something else." She opened it and pulled out a set of keys. "Is this?" "A cottage, on the edge of town, needs work, lots of it." She looked up. "I don't want to buy your silence," he said. "I want to build your sanctuary." She stepped into his space and wrapped her arms around his waist. "I want to build something too," she whispered. "Us?" She nodded. But slow, honest, real. He kissed her forehead. "I wouldn't want it any other way." The cottage stood at the far end of a quiet lane, a little crooked, a little weathered, but solid. Nael stepped inside for the first time just after sunrise. Light spilled through cracked shutters. The air smelled of old pine and rain-soaked earth. Callan followed behind her, a coffee thermos in one hand, tools in the other. She walked through the space slowly. Wooden beams, a fireplace made of stone, a tiny kitchen that had good bones even if it was missing cabinet doors. She looked at the floor. "I can already hear the footsteps here," she said softly. Callan set the tools down and walked beside her. "Then we start here." He knelt and removed a loose board. She grabbed a pry bar and joined him. And just like that, they began. Over the next several weeks, their days took on a new rhythm. Morning tea on her porch, work at the cafe or on the cottage, evening meals, shared plans, unshared silence. She learned how to sand hardwood. He learned how to step back when she needed space. They didn't label it, didn't define the pace, but they were building something real, not just out of wood and stone, but out of presence. Nael didn't talk about Callan anymore. She didn't need to. His name had faded from her tongue, the way pain does when it's no longer tied to survival. One afternoon, while painting the bedroom walls a muted ivory, Nael heard Callan calling from outside. "Come here." She wiped her hands on her jeans and stepped onto the porch. He pointed toward the road. A girl on a bicycle rode by, curly hair tied up, pink backpack strapped to her shoulders. She looked no older than 9. Nael froze. It wasn't her, she knew that, but for a split second, her chest tightened. Then, it softened. She turned to Callan. "She looks happy." He nodded. "She probably is." Nael exhaled. "I used to wonder if Rhea would know me if she saw me. And now, I hope she never needs to." Callan stepped closer. "That's the kindest goodbye I've ever heard." That evening, after cleaning up paintbrushes, they sat on the front steps of the cottage, feet in the grass, hands brushing gently. Nael leaned her head against his shoulder. "I used to think love had to be dramatic to be deep," she murmured. "Big gestures, big forgiveness, big returns." Callan kissed the top of her head. "This is better." She nodded. "It is." Weeks passed. The cottage took shape, and so did they. People began to stop by, curious neighbors, old clients, cafe regulars. They offered to help, offered tools, offered food. Nael didn't push them away. She allowed them in, not to impress them, but to belong. It was a kind of community she never realized she'd missed. One night, as they sat in the finished living room, fire crackling, new furniture in place, Callan handed her a small notebook. She opened it. Inside were hand-sketched floor plans, designs, notes in his neat handwriting. "What is this?" she asked. "Our next one," he said. "If you want it." Nael flipped through the pages. "You want to build more cottages?" "I want to build spaces with you," he said. "For people healing, starting over, reclaiming peace. You design it. I help bring it to life." Nael looked up. "You're serious?" "I've never been more." She held the notebook to her chest. "I'm in," she whispered. "On all of it." On the 1-year anniversary of the day she left Callan, she didn't mark the day with sadness. She didn't light a candle or reread the letter she wrote him. She simply stood in her own kitchen, in her own home, with the man she loved sitting at the counter, flipping through her newest magazine feature. And when he looked up and said, "You know, you look lighter this month," she replied, "That's because I stopped carrying what wasn't mine." They never held a wedding. They never posted photos. But in every corner of their life together, there was a quiet vow. To be honest, to move slow, to choose peace over performance, and to always, always protect the kind of love that didn't ask them to shrink. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with redirection. Some goodbyes aren't loud. They're sacred. And some love stories don't start with fireworks. They start with someone choosing to come home, not to a person, but to themselves. If this story spoke to you, tell us in the comments, what moment made you choose yourself again? Like, share, subscribe to Mr. Charles Stories, where every chapter heals something quietly.